Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another Gaudy Mitzvahs 22 YouTube video and Podbean podcast for my blog, gaudymitzvahs.com. This is part two of a conversation I had about, I guess, 3 weeks ago now, maybe a month. I lose track of time. I've been on various trips and so on. And so here's part two. It's with Conor Cunningham, Adrian Walker, Rodney Howsare. No need to reintroduce everybody. We're discussing this essentialized thing that everybody thinks they know what it is, modern science. And we have the expert here on this topic, Conor Cunningham. We ended last time, we wanted to discuss a little bit the question of the role of science in the modern university. But before we do that, my former colleague, my friend Rodney Howsare emailed me to say, "Hey, Chapp, should I do a little intro for you today, summarizing what we said last time?" And I said, "Yeah, that would be wonderful because I need a refresher too." So go ahead, Rodney.
Thanks, Chapp. And thanks to Conor and Adrian for being here again. That was a really interesting conversation last time. It's hard to tell sometimes when you're in the middle of the thing how it's going, but I rewatched it and it was actually really rousing stuff. And
I don't mean to interrupt you, but on my end, as the host of this, I got tons and tons of really positive feedback. So that's good. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, but I always learn an enormous amount from both of you, and that was the same. This last discussion, it's such a kind of refreshing thing to hear you guys sort of turn everything on its head and then realize that that's actually the right way up. So that's always bracing and a good thing. So I thought maybe what I would do just to help the viewers out a little bit, maybe that didn't see the last one or who have forgotten kind of what we did. I just hit some of the highlights that I picked up from the last thing. And if I botch this a little bit because I'm not the origin of these things, you guys can correct me and censor me.
Or the oracle.
I'm going to confession after this anyhow, so it'll give you just more things that I have to tell the priest. So, but at any rate, we began by really just calling into question the entire typical science and religion dialogue sort of model, which already seems to presuppose a kind of caricature or a simulacrum, I think, as Conor called it, of both science and theology. And kind of, I think what happens if I'm correct about this is that we have this modern sort of common person's notion of science as this very rarefied thing that has this extremely unified method, and it kind of always works magic and gets right down to the bottom of things without any mysterious leftover or anything like that. And then on the other hand, religion has become strange as science has become bigger and bigger and able to deal with more and more. Of course, religion and theology's territory gets littler and littler, and theology becomes kind of about like private beliefs of people who still need assurance that death is not the end or something like that. So, but if you think about it, and this is something that came out in something you did in another video that I watched, Conor, an interview recently about nihilism and evolution, I believe, or something, Darwin and nihilism or whatever. I mean, theology originally is just simply a part of philosophy. It's what you call the highest part of what Aristotle is eventually going to call first philosophy, right? So it's not this rarefied little subjective thing that only deals with supernatural stuff that nobody can see, but it has definitely a rational element to it. And up until very recently, as Conor pointed out last episode, science has been called part of the natural philosophy, which obviously has a larger interest than simply, mechanical objects moving in, merely material objects sort of moving in space. And I think that was really the thing that got us off the ground and got the conversation going. And then there's just a couple of other highlights that I thought were quite interesting. And this is kind of part of Conor's central point, going all the way back to the book on Darwin, which I read many years ago now and forgot probably more than I learned from it, but I learned a lot. And that is that one of the flaws of the stereotypical understanding of modern science is that we're always trying to get down to some base that is beyond anything mysterious or thing-like. There's just the stuff that kind of that everything else emerges out of, all the spooky stuff emerges out of this bedrock stuff. But the problem, of course, is when real science actually starts looking at that bedrock stuff, it's pretty sexy. It turns out not to be the boring, merely material, merely mechanistic matter that, thing. I remember the late David L. Schindler used to always say, "Show me a piece of matter," and then that's a point well taken, that there's even matter is way more interesting than we could possibly.
That was a pretty good imitation of David L. Schindler, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You can't point to matter, a piece of matter. You can't point to matter.
Yeah. That's exactly right. It's always formed to some degree. It's always, in act, et cetera. Right. So, and then a kind of final point that I think Adrian really brought into the discussion too, is just the reminder that God has from the outset had something to do with the physical world. Right, which sounds like such a no-brainer, but I really think this is something that people don't realize, and so what we end up doing is we think of miracles, for instance, as these kind of free radicals that just occur out of time, just out of space and outside of space and time, and have nothing to do with anything, sort of like magic. But in fact, as Adrian and Conor both pointed out, all of the miracles in Scripture actually begin with real stuff. The multiplication of the bread and loaves is the multiplication of bread and loaves, and Jesus walking on water is Jesus walking on water, and that kind of stuff. So those are just three kind of, I think, central points that came out of the last thing that were especially interesting to me, might be interesting to our viewers, and might get us launched off on the second part. So I'll shut up and let you all say.
I would like, before Conor or Adrian chime in, to add to that, which is, that's a great summary, but also I think it's important to mention as a jumping off point for some conversation today, that we were sort of all agreed that modern science in its various disciplines, especially say physics and evolutionary biology, is in a state of crisis right now, because none of the standard models really hold up, and very few of them actually work, and actually working scientists, most of them understand this, and they're kind of in a mad panic over it, and I think that's important. But anyway, do our two august guests want to chime in with anything to get us started here, either Conor or Adrian?
Can I just say something about the word crisis there, which Adrian and I have talked about elsewhere? When it goes back to Hippocrates, that I know in Greek it can mean a few different things, but one of the points of crisis, remember this, Adrian, that it can either mean it can also mean the turning point of a disease towards health. So crisis is, in a Hippocratic sense, an opportunity, and this is very much what I see. So I don't see the crises in evolutionary models or physics models or chemistry. I don't see that necessarily as something to be yaboo. But rather, it's the opportunity to come to one's senses and use what's being discovered and direct it in a manner which is more adequate, truthful, and flourishing, rather than doubling down on a failed paradigm. So crisis is there an opportunity for the turning point of disease, its diagnosis, and a turning point. Sorry, it's both positive
and it's a decisional moment that requires honesty. Adrian?
I don't have a ton to add at the moment.
Okay.
But I will just say one thing that occurred to me when Rodney was talking about the pertinence of God to the physical world. And that is that there are actually two sort of movements of thought here. One is, the recognition that God is pertinent to the physical world, and also sort of on the other side and from the other direction, the recognition that the physical world is pertinent to God. So that, to be present to things, even corporeal things, as they really are, is already, implicitly to be in the presence of God, not only because God is sustaining them in being, from their inmost core, from moment to moment, but also because the physical things are symbolic of divinity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But I guess one implication of what I'm saying is that there's a kind of there is a sort of fidelity to the earth, so to speak, that is very important, and that very fidelity to sort of the earth, as it were, in its actual reality is theologically significant, is pertinent to God. I mean, and helps us figure out what the word God means, right? And it's not an accident that Scripture is the symbolic cosmos of Scripture really draws on the symbolic cosmos of the world.
The symbolic and sacramental nature of the cosmos, for sure. And I think that's a really important point, an important question.
Yeah.
Because there's some reason why God created matter. And there have to be analogs to divine perfections. Right. In the created order. Otherwise, I mean, the question then would naturally arise: why matter at all? Then, if matter represents a competitive principle to that of divinity and spirit, then you have to fall back into some sort of notion of our souls and soma sema, that the body is a tomb for the soul, and these kinds of things. And then you have a hard time explaining why in the heck we spend 70 some odd years in this ridiculous shell of a body only to shed it and fly off like Tinkerbell into spirit land. There's got to be a deeper theological and metaphysical rationale for corporeality, for materiality.
Yeah.
In our doctrine of creation. Conor.
I just think we've got to be careful, because I first of all, two tiny little things. It's interesting when Rodney talks about the word, we have to get rid of the word merely and just, as you said before, and the and we talked about. Also, even Adrian went, and even the corporeal. We need to get rid of the even. Of course, the corporeal will have something pertinent to do with God. And it comes back then to Larry's point. I think we've got to tread carefully there, saying God created matter. I don't think matter exists in those terms.
Excellent point. I really
think it was, and it never did for Aquinas. And in fact, sorry, you're going to say something, Larry, there.
No, I was just wanting to say, I think if I had elaborated further, I was going to say something similar to what you're, so please go on. Please elaborate on this point.
I mean, that's really, if anything, I mean, there are lots of things we can always point to and think this was a bad move. And I think probably for me, the most significant culturally has been the fiction of matter. I mean, as a something. And that has been a great disaster, if you like, as Plato would call it. That he uses this word disaster very particularly, and which is beautiful the way he uses it. But anyway, without a proper measure, you end up with disaster, he calls it, due measure and proper proportional, whatever. And matter just simply does not. I mean, I love the way even the guy up in, what's his name, the Thomist up in CUA, up in Catholic University, John Whipple, not right, that's not his name, he says, that even Aquinas is saying that that matter isn't something individual, is probably his finest metaphysical point. And I agree with him in that. In fact, it was the person who really did this. It wasn't later on we talk about Scotus and Occam and so forth, yet they were also guilty of that, as was Henry of Ghent. But really, it was Averroes was the first person to do this, where he posited something called celestial matter as opposed to terrestrial. And even when you were dead, the soul was derived by celestial matter. But Averroes, the commentator, posited celestial matter as being wholly independent of God. So this was the first anticipation of matter being as something separate. Therefore, we've been asked the question, what's matter got to do with God? Because we're presuming implicitly, our premise is that it is something self-givingly independent, autonomous, self-explanatory, and therefore we have to have an extrinsic explanation for it. Whereas I don't think, and this is what really Aquinas' huge battle was in Paris and elsewhere, was the denial of multiple forms. There's only one substantial form of the body for any body. And also to deny matter having its own form. That was really the dividing point. All the posh people in Paris thought he was nuts. Of course, matter has its own form. And he went, no. And it's that move, that's the precipice of modernity. To posit that matter can exist in itself, that it is a self-contained concept, a self-explanatory concept, an autonomous thing, It simply doesn't exist. And that's why Aquinas resisted so heroically, actually. And that's why I tell students, he's a punk, and everyone thinks he's this dusty old Catholic saint. Actually, he was a punk fighting the posh Parisian people who seemed to be de rigueur scientists of their day. And he went, no, science and matter does not have its own form, and regarding bodies, it's only one form, one substantial form. I don't mean accidental forms in that sense. I mean substantial forms, yeah. Does that make sense? I think that's the dividing. I think we go, that's the turning, that's the fork in the road. We either think that matter is a principle, a metaphysical principle, and then all that comes with that, right up to people like Haman, who sees creation as the words of God, spoken by God. Or we go the other fork in the road and we think matter is something autarchical and self-given and almost obvious. And then we have to lapse into it's merely matter or even the corporeal, because we've already started with the presupposition that it is cogently considerable, separate from divine being. Does that make sense?
No, it makes beautiful sense, and I agree with it completely. Howsare, do you have anything you want to add to that? You look like maybe you do. If you don't, that's fine. I have another question.
I had a question just to kind of now a technical, and I'd say let's not maybe take over this too long, but just, I mean, is this what the Neoplatonists, so to speak, are getting at when they refer to matter as being almost nothing?
Yeah,
right. It's almost nothing on its own, right? It can't on its own. It's literally almost nothing, right?
Yes, but it also ties in with what Walker said last time when he was talking about the receptacle, for example. Do you remember this, Adrian? You were talking about the receptacle, and so but matter is nude. There's actually in Latin, and so it's nude. Yeah, it is not something, but in so being, it's really strange. Aquinas does this really weird move. So on the one hand, it looks like you're denigrating matter by stripping it of any somethingness of its own. Yet, but Aquinas makes the double move of going, yeah, we're going to bring it right down to being no thing. Yet, what he compares the soul with of the human is with analogous, he says, to matter, because it has the capacity for everything. Yeah, the capacity even for God, the capax Dei and all that. The capacity for everything, let's stick with that. So too does matter have the capacity for everything, because precisely it isn't something. And what does he say about the soul? When he talks about the soul being tabula rasa, he's not being a Glock, right? We tend to get that out of the way. It's like matter in it. It isn't colored, so we can see color. It doesn't have an organ, so we can see many different things. So he strips the soul of actually somethingness. It's a verb. It's the act of being. It's the provision of form. It's a substantial form of the body. So in a way, it comes full circle, the nudity of matter and the nudity of soul. And then they have capacity for everything. So it's a complement, not a denigration.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's interesting. I'm a former student of ours, friend of Rodney's, friend of Adrian's, Rachel Coleman, who now teaches up in Massachusetts. She had an article in Communio that sort of dealt with this issue of the nothingness of matter. I don't know if you had that in mind, Rodney, when you were asking the question, if you read Rachel's, but she was basically expositing Ferdinand Ulrich on this very topic of the nothingness of matter. And I think Ulrich is, maybe Adrian could speak to this a little more in depth than I can. I'm completely out of my depth when I talk about Ulrich. But I think that we're onto something very important here when we're talking about the nothingness of matter. Conor has gotten us this very profound understanding, I think, of Aquinas here. Adrian, do you have, if you don't, it's fine. I don't want to put you on the spot with regard to Ulrich.
Well, yes. So Rachel's sort of thesis is that, matter is an image of the good, right? So the good is sort of super substantial and the matter is sort of infra substantial. It's sort of, so the good escapes form from above and the matter escapes form from below, but there's a kind of imaging of what escapes of form from above by what escapes it from below, and kind of along the lines that Conor was saying. And then of course Ulrich, what I just said is a kind of, is a sort of Neoplatonic way of putting it, but I think what Ulrich does is try to kind of refashion that sort of Neoplatonic vision into sort of terms of the actus essendi and its non-subsistence, and how the non-subsistence of the actus essendi sort of reveals this kind of supraformal plenitude. But then there's something about the reception of that supraformal plenitude, not only by creatures in general, but by bodily creatures, that in its very receptivity sort of has a kind of direct pipeline to that kind of supraformal plenitude, right? And so Rachel is kind of following out the kind of Ulrichian account of that, and sort of developing it also in her own way, something like that.
It's a brilliant article.
Can I
anyway,
yeah. Well, yeah. So I'm so tired this morning. I'm having trouble pulling things together, but there's something about this idea of the receptacle, which is important to kind of tease out, because it sort of represents a point of where a discernment is necessary, right? Because the idea of matter as a thing, which is just sort of at the bottom of the reel, or the back of the reel, on which everything is built, right? That's what we're criticizing that and saying that doesn't really work. And it's absolutely true, right? That matter sort of taken by itself isn't a thing. It's there's something almost ineffable about it. Okay,
which is, are we not discovering that? Yes,
right. But the other side of it is that it's sort of like there's a kind of the receptacle, I think, like in the Timaeus, also functions as a kind of hypothetically necessary condition of the donative activity of the good. And that's the other side of it. So and that's I think also something that maybe Rachel is getting at in her work, right? That there's a kind of so which again, and this is a thought that Ulrich develops in all kinds of different ways, but that part of the giving of part of the goods donation is to give itself a kind of receptive presupposition of its own giving. And so that there's something about the receptivity that's represent of this principle that Plato calls the receptacle, that does have
your sound is kind of breaking up.
It does have the character of a okay, well, that's probably a sign that I should stop talking.
Well, no, I wasn't trying to get you to stop talking, but it's just that I just wanted you to know that, your sound is kind of breaking up just a bit. You sound like you're coming from the space station or something. So that's kind of cool. It's giving you an ethereal quality.
I am. It's Space Station, California, man.
When we come to universities, I'm going to absolutely lambast California in a second. But just on that receptacle thing, we mustn't have that notion. I mean, this is Adrian's point, but necessity comes in that it's not, we mustn't understand it in the dualism of passive and active. It's not like that, because again, for Aquinas and Plato, I mean, Aquinas has there's a lovely Latin phrase, I can't remember what it is now, but matter desires, it's an erotic relationship with form. It desires form, it seeks it out. So it's not just some sort of, it's not just like when you put your happy birthday into it, what do you call those things? Yeah, stick it in, and they always do.
Yeah,
and
Oh,
yeah, and
Adrian,
the receptacle, in other words, the point about the receptacle is that it's the receptacle enables that, right? It enables, again, just I'm just kind of glossing the Timaeus here, right? That some of the passages in which Plato talks about, or Plato talks about the receptacle in the Timaeus, that it enables things to participate in forms. But that means that on the one hand, it is a kind of hypothetically necessary condition, but on the other hand, it participates in the way that the good gives being, provides being, by enabling things
Adrian,
to
you're
receive it,
okay.
to receive being, to their very receptivity. Yeah, I
Breaking up.
this isn't, I don't, it's working. Yeah.
Yeah, your sound is really getting
If I could make
kind
a
of bad.
recommendation, Adrian, I think your sound was better on the other connection. Your video was worse, but your sound was better on the other connection.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try.
Try something else here.
And you're much
Because
more interesting to hear than to look at, Adrian, anyhow. So it's kind of
that's right. Well, now his video froze. But anyway, while Adrian is figuring that out, let's move on. I do want to move on to the sort of the role of science in the modern university.
How's that now?
It sounds good. Sounds good. We're moving on now to
Okay.
the question of the role of science in the modern university.
Go ahead. Did enough of what I say come through?
I think so. It was a bit broken up. I don't know what it was for the other two guys, but for me, it was broken up. I was having a hard time following you.
Okay, can I just sort of bring it to the point, and then we can
Sure,
move
absolutely,
on?
absolutely. Go ahead.
I do think it's important to. So, in other words, yeah, the receptacle enables things to participate, and it does that, you could say, by enabling them to receive something.
Yeah.
But of course, that also means that it is their receptivity, right? And my point is that in being this kind of enabling receptivity, it actually already images the goodness of the good.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that so now again, this is where you have to make a discernment, because this doesn't mean that the receptacle is this kind of thing like it's not a passive thing like entity that's just sort of there, and that the creator or the good has to kind of reckon with, because that would just be the myth of the base all over again. But it does, and that's why Plato says, it's not even the elements. The elements are downstream, right?
Yeah.
But it does mean that in order to sort of, in order to receive, things do have to receive according to certain conditions, right?
Yeah.
And so everything is going to be made of elements somehow, right? Or they're going to be discernible in things, right? It's going to be possible to, talk about, I mean, however confused the language is and so forth, it's going to be possible to talk about, laws of nature and so forth. In other words, patterns that seem to hold across different kinds of things, right? And where does that all come from, right? I mean, to a large extent, sure, there's something constructed about all of that, but the point is that you know, embodiment, you know, receiving being in bodily form, even though the sort of principle of that receptivity is not a body, it's not a thing, it's not a thing-like entity, nonetheless, it sort of comes with subjection to certain conditions.
Yeah.
You know, and it seems to me that like a lot of what we call modern science is doing is sort of exploring those conditions, with a great deal of lack of self-knowledge that leads to all kinds of false reifications and sort of unnecessary problems that need to be sort of therapized out of existence, granted. But there is something there. That's what I would say. I don't know if that
Well,
makes
that's
sense.
great. No, it makes perfect sense. And I'm so glad your sound came back and you were, because now it's fine. It's absolutely perfect. And that you were able to complete your point, because it's a beautiful segue into what I wanted to talk about next,
Well, I
which
think
was,
looks like Connor had, sorry to go.
oh, no, absolutely. If Connor wants to say something, go ahead, Connor.
I think this is to sort of supplement what Adrian said last time and to what he's just said now about, if you go back in history, there were people within the guild who were signs that were outside the Baconian paradigm,
Right.
which is a failed paradigm because it was self-deluded. But I think, and again, back to the crisis, it can be a bad thing or it could be the turning point of the disease. I think rather than looking for eccentric figures, if you like, outside the thing, it's better to look at, remember I said before, look at what's being done, but look at it differently than how the practitioners are looking at it. So whilst you can have a pop like, I did last time, at string theory and so forth, and look at gravity and so forth, you can look at it again in a Gestalt switch, if you like, and see it as a pursuit of Platonic forms, for example. The Platonic forms used by mineralogists, the crystallization, so forth. The strings are almost like Platonic forms. You have, scale invariance, you have universality across all different material bases. And all this are pushing and pushing and pushing towards a return up, as I said before, bumping into Plato up ahead. So we don't necessarily look for people in the wilderness, we can look at people at Main Street, but just look at what they're doing differently, in a way different than they are noticing. And they are not noticing because of a post-Reformation myopia or emaciation of the imagination, where they sort of think everything's new now and they've missed out 1,000 years of
absolutely.
And I don't know if I said this last time. I was watching a documentary with my son, who sort of does science as a math, and did I mention the two quotes that I put up? Did I mention this last time in the last interview? I don't know. Well, we watched the thing on physics and string theory and so forth, but and then I put two quotes up, and I said one of these is a world famous theoretical physicist, and one of these is Plato. Which one do you think is which?
Right.
And my son, who does all this, couldn't discern. Hold on one second. Yes, I'm in the middle of it. It's my wife coming in the same time I'm serving her dinner at. Yes.
Yes.
Off you go. What? I'm in the middle of. I don't know, Pet. Yes. Sorry about that. Domesticity. So, yeah, and I said, which one is this famous physicist? He's a guy called De Hooft from Utrecht, and which one is Plato? A quote from the Statesman, and he couldn't tell, and nor could I looking at the names, because these people are pushing themselves back to Plato. It's so funny they're bumping up into Plato, not being reactionary, going, oh, it's something in the past, but when physics is taking itself to the nth degree, it's going to go lapse into, it's going to unfold into metaphysics, inevitably into a form of Platonic metaphysics, not silly metaphysics. Yeah.
Can I just say, I'm so sorry, Connor. Can I just jump in and say two things? So first, I mean, you could say that the eccentric people are the people who have already done the Gestalt shift. So it's not that they're talking about something else. They're the ones who are doing, in a way, what you're saying. They're seeing that something is being revealed here that the sort of standard kind of account is not accounting for. But so that's one thing. But then the other thing, I mean, in other words, I guess what I just to go back to the other point, I think this is really important. It's got to be both the case that, you know, matter is not this thing, right? It's not the base and all of that, but it's also got to be the case that being embodied, right, receiving being in corporeal form comes with certain necessary conditions, because otherwise, which necessary conditions take the form of, you know, being analyzable, however perfectly, however imperfectly, and however, you know, sort of confusedly, you know, in terms of whatever the latest thing is, you know, whether it's people talking about atoms or people talking about, you know, all of these kind of, you know, new sorts of structures or entities, you know, theoretical or otherwise, that are coming to light. I mean, why is it that all bodily things are susceptible of being talked about in that way, right? The false conclusion would be, well, because at the core, they're just a bunch of entities like that are the basis of everything else. And so matter is this thing-like entity. But perhaps it's something like, you know, there's something about the receptacle or about sort of prime matter that, even though it's not a thing or a thing-like entity, it's not any one of these structures or entities or whatever. Nonetheless, when it's sort of mobilized and summoned into some kind of visibility by form, has all of these structures and entities in them, or at least can be analyzed or talked about in terms of them. I mean, again, however complex that analysis may be in terms of a kind of interplay of the constructed and the sort of, you know, merely potentially present, blah, 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 right? You can make it as complex as you want. But the fact of the matter is, like, why is it that material things, not matter as prime matter or the receptacle, but nonetheless material things, which, you know, sort of actualize the receptacle, as it were, or actualize prime matter, why is it that they're susceptible of being discussed in these terms, all of them, right? That has to be explained, it seems to me. I don't know, am I making sense?
What you mean is that there's an indigenous intelligibility, an irreducible indigenous intelligibility, that they're inviting and accommodating such thinking. Is that what you mean?
Well, no, what I mean, it's sort of like, in other words, it's kind of like Aristotle says, you know, if you're going to have a saw, it has to be made out of certain material, right? So if you're going to have bodies, they're going to have to be constituted in certain ways, and the necessity of that constitution, I think, is rooted somehow in the receptacle or in prime matter, even though the receptacle / prime matter is not a thing. You know, it's not a thing. It's not stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I'm trying to say. It's like we've got to hold on to both of these things here, that on the one hand, matter as such, or the receptacle as such, is not a thing. It's not even the elements. There's no, the myth of the base has no leg to stand on. But on the other hand, there's, you know, if things are going to be bodies, if they're going to sort of partake of, you know, prime matter or the receptacle, you know, by receiving and holding a certain form, they're going to do so constituted necessarily in certain ways, which is why you can have a physics, right, which seems to, which can apply to more than just one body or just one kind of body. But I mean, in principle, applies to all bodies, right?
Yeah.
And my point is that the problem is that people have typically taken that universal applicability of physics to sort of all bodies, abstracting from, sort of the differences that come with substantial form, as a proof that that matter must be some kind of base.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm saying no,
yeah.
But nonetheless, there is something there are sort of necessities that are kind of latent in the receptacle or prime matter that only will kick in, when things, on the basis of
Uh-oh, we're losing Adrian again.
those necessities actually kick in and actually take and actually have some kind of discernible structure and pattern.
This is fascinating.
It will happen, right?
Yeah.
It won't happen with matter by itself, but once form enters the picture, it will happen. And that's the thing that needs to be looked at, I think.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. You cut out for one brief second there, Adrian, but you came back. Well, it looks like he's frozen again. So we're having technical difficulties with Adrian. But anyway, maybe now we can move on to the question of, I'll turn it over to Conor. Conor, what then is the role? What's the role of this thing we call science at a modern university?
Well, I think first of all, we've got to look at the idea of university. I mean, I don't know if I said this last time, but it's something that dawned on me that seems to be something that it's hidden in plain sight, but people don't notice it. And I was saying before that, I think that I said last time, but you can imagine those people inventing it in Bologna all those years ago, 1,000 years ago, yeah? And they say, we're going to invent this thing. What is this thing? This thing's called a university. To do what? To study the universe. A university to study the universe. And the verse is important there, regarding logos, logoi, and so forth. The universe, university, and so forth. And that means you bring all these disciplines together in modes of scientia, knowledge, to lead to sapientia, to lead to wisdom in some sense. You have a universe to study the university, to study the university, study the universe. And what's happening now to science is, because of our attribute imaginations and its cultural positioning, it's come to dominate. And as it tries to subsume other disciplines to its base, whatever that base may be. So on the one hand, you have this fracturing into, say, the arts and the sciences to begin with, yeah? And then the sciences are all proud of this because it's a demarcation point where they get kudos. They get, but then what happens? You get your biology, chemistry, and physics, and they go, yeah, we'll stop, forget religion, forget philosophy, forget literature, forget history, forget all this stuff. We just need the sciences, and they go, yeah, that's great. But then the guy to the right, physics, goes, right, bye biology, bye chemistry, and then they become subsumed. As Ernst Rutherford famous saying, there's only physics, all else is just social work. Or was it stamp? Yeah. He was the stamp collector. All else is just stamp collecting. And so there was this dominance amongst in the university where physics, especially high energy physics, as I said before in the previous one, was the master discourse. It tantalized us. It teased us with this notion of a theory of everything, which was going to give us mastery of the universe on this from within the powers and mandate of this one discipline. The one discipline to rule them all.
To bind, and the darkness bind them. Well, I think that is directly pertinent to what Adrian was just talking about. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Adrian. I hope you could.
Well, my connection lapsed anyway.
Well, so, I know you froze, and so we moved on. But I want to be sure that you get an opportunity to finish. But anyway, I think it does relate to what you were saying in the sense that there is this perception in the modern university all right, that nature is made up of these entities, these wee beasties, these little things that go all the way down, and everything is structured on. And if we could just bust up the atom enough times and find the Higgs boson or the Higgs boson's boson or whatever the heck, we finally get down to that God particle that explains, as Conor just said, this theory of this theory of everything. Anyway, so back to you, Conor. You wanted to say something
about that? So what you do is it's the one ring to rule them all. Yes. So high energy physics becomes that it teases us, seduces us into thinking it's going to get to the bottom of things.
Yeah.
Right. We'll get to the bottom of things, and then we can wield that in a form of mastery. Or everything else is subsumed into this one currency. Forget biology, but chemistry, psychology, literature, theology, whatever. And that's a lovely seductive narrative to put that, in terms of fast food, in terms of fast thinking. Just go, yeah, there's my bulletin. To theory of everything, fund this. We will be all powerful as human beings. And the metrics coming with that are easier because they're apparently tangible. We will do, well, I'll come back to metrics in a sense in a second with university. But let me say about the Higgs boson. It's so funny about that because people don't. Can I just tell a little thing on the irony of the God particle? As you rightly say, some people thought it was going to be called the God particle, but there's a wonderful irony in that. Because the reason was the God particle was going to provide mass, right? That was the provision of mass. Yeah. But what it's done, I mean, this is absolutely true. So it was discovered in 2012, yeah, but they knew it was coming. Higgs predicted in 1964 or something like that up in Edinburgh. But what was really funny about it is that there's a wonderful interview in the famous journal Science, I think, and it was it was in 2009 or 2010, and basically the scientists were absolutely excuse my Latin, crapping themselves because when the Large Hadron Collider was operational and spent all these Swiss francs, yeah. And they were going, and what they call themselves, it will be a 5-star nightmare scenario. And here it was going to be in two forms. And here's the irony of the God particle. On the one hand, they might discover anything when someone presses the on button, right? So all that billions wasted. On the other hand, and here's the 5-star scenario, that they discover the Higgs. And only the Higgs. And they were absolutely saying they'd prefer to actually discover nothing. Why? Because if you discover the Higgs boson, it could grind particle physics to an end. And that's exactly what happened. And if you even look at so it's the God particle, physics came to an end. And I'll explain it. And this is not me, it's there in the literature. That's why I'm saying you don't need eccentric figures. If you go through it.
Absolutely.
So these eccentric figures give us an intuition, but they don't necessarily give us the material. So someone like Hans Jonas, fantastic for his intuitions, but not necessarily the material. It's not efficient. Right. So the Higgs boson was a disaster. And if you actually look at when they discover it in the studio, you're going, woo, woo, but you can see it. If you read the room like a poker player with, they're going, bum. I mean, it's just and funders going to say, yeah, we've found the elusive Higgs God particle magic. But really, it was God coming back in revenge by saying, by the way, physics, your time is up. Because what it revealed was that the standard model, there was no what's called BSM, beyond standard model physics, right? They thought the whole raft of exotic particles, what are called on-shell particles. And but the Higgs rocked up and went, nah, I'm just here on my own, mate. And here's the really scary thing. This sounds technical, but it's not. But before the Higgs boson, you had two sort of things. You had two types of elementary particle. Adrian was talking about elements, with elementary particles. And so you had sort of half-spin fermions, right? So things like, and then sort of half-spin fermions and then one-spin bosons, right? So like a photon for a boson. And yeah. And then the Higgs rocks up and it's a zero spin. And it means it's scalar. And no other elementary particle is scalar or zero spin, right? And this means it's quadratic rather than, it disturbs the force look. It completely throws the and shows that the standard model is only an effective theory, right? It's not real.
Right.
It's floating like the Magritte castle in the sky, just like anything else. So you have your fermions and electrons, these half spins, and your full spins, your bosons, like your photons. And then the Higgs rocks up and goes, I'm zero spin and I'm quadratic and I'm going to upset the entire thing. Because to tame me, because if the Higgs boson is elementary, that means you have to have scalar particles as elementary. And that means they're quadratic, which means they have to be fine-tuned to an industrial scale to render them what's called natural. Right? So there's a sheer panic. This is the crisis. And they even think that the Large Hadron Collider, no matter how high you rejig it and bring the new big, massive trillion one, you still won't have any longer any on-shell discoveries, i.e. new particles. It'll be off-shell discoveries. Events might happen, but no longer will you be able to encase it in a particle. The language of particles has gone beyond its use.
Yeah.
So that's a massive crisis. So this thing, one ring to rule them all, just melts in Mount Doom. It's no longer can put a shell on itself. So it actually could be end of particle physics as we know it. It's like that Star Trek thing, it's life, but not as we know it. It's physics, but not as we knew it.
Right.
And that's why I'm saying it's pushing towards Plato. It's returning to Plato ahead of itself. And this is absolutely true. And what it does is there's a massive other problem with the Higgs. This is why it's the God particles. It chastises the vanity of physics. It duly chastises it and shows it up to be a wonderfully creative but apophatic. The science is apophatic. It is not cataphatic in that sense. It's always approaching a receding horizon. Yep. It's always approaching a receding horizon. It's always apophatic. It tells us wonderful things, accurate things to many, many degrees, but they aren't true if you think you've captured something. Right. And this is built in. It's baked in. It's not something extrinsic. It's baked into the actual process.
Right.
What one wonderful guy up in Chicago, a guy called Mark Wilson, called physics avoidance, where physics to work must avoid itself. So its most successful things are self-consciously inaccurate.
Right.
And that's the only way you get successful physics. It's actually, and this is the way we've got to think of science, rather than this hegemonic one ring to rule them all, as a proto-art.
Right.
It's beautiful proto-art, which has given us incredible wealth, riches, but they've been put in the wrong bank account.
Right.
This brings us back to university, where universities become corporate, and then the only metrics they have now is, my prime minister, only last week, was saying, we have to investigate degrees, make sure not any Mickey Mouse degrees, and the metrics, and this is California, the micromanagement through metrics is employability, how long have you taken to get a salary after graduating, so all the way. And what is really strange about this is that capitalism is malfunctioning, because there are no longer entrepreneurs, they're no longer risk takers, everything's risk averse, everything's just simply the automatons of corporatism. There are no one's diagonalizing out and actually saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to think this way, I'm going to think that way, off-piste, if you like, because they're all seduced to a common denominator. And this is why the joke was that, we were having to take care marking this year because, like you guys, with this Chat GPT thing, right, with this artificial intelligence. And I said to Rowan Williams and some of my colleagues, I said, I have no idea why everyone's getting fussed about Chat GPT, because it's old news. It's simply showing a mirror to what's already the case, because our students are automatons anyway. We're not allowed to have discretion any longer how we mark. There's a marking rubric, marking guidance, mark schemes, all this rubbish to take all the humanity out of the humanities.
Right.
And dampen all creativity and make everyone automatons only fit for corporate lives. And the corporations, even the big banks, are tick boxing exercises now. They have no risk taking, no entrepreneurship, no creativity. They're risk averse and they're uniform. And our universities, rather than studying the universe, our universities are just becoming a place of uniformity.
Right.
With baseless, lobotomizing metrics.
Yeah.
Because what they do, they have a false notion of objectivity. They think objectivity can be can be captured, calibrated, put into standardized, rationalized categories. I mean, I don't know, and this is where we be careful with our language. We talk about the hard sciences, physics, versus the soft sciences, say biology or psychology or something. That's rubbish. There is no hard science in the world. They're all soft. And the flip side of that is, and be careful we're not seduced, when someone like David Chalmers in Philosophy of Mind posits in the 97 or whatever it was, 95, 97, the hard problem in philosophy of mind, we all go, as opposed to soft problems, we think that's great. And Chalmers was brilliant by doing that and showing that philosophy of mind was talking bunkum. And it could never, and he just won the bet in New York, didn't he, 2 weeks ago, the 10-year bet with the guy said neurology was sort of solve consciousness, and he got a really expensive case of port, I think, or something. And they've reissued the bet for another 10 years or something. And but I remember reading it in the 90s, Chalmers' work, and thinking this is great. But I remember thinking there's a bit like the hard sciences, soft sciences. I actually don't think, one, it's a hard problem as opposed to soft problems. I think the soft problems are just as hard. They seem to have been solved by ever more refined descriptions, but I still think there's a lot of hardness woven into the philosophy of mind that we think we've solved. I think it's right. But anyway, I don't think there are any hard sciences. I think that physics has come a cropper. It's going to have to open up into a more metaphysical Platonic mode of being. And a university, unfortunately, going to be so many car crashes until it comes to senses. And I really think this is California's fault. I really do. I'm not just saying this because of Walker. I really do. I think that things are invented, and it's a country to itself. I mean, I think the two most malevolent influences in the 20th century in terms of countries is sort of Germany in terms of the First and Second World War and National Socialism, and California.
Yeah.
Because what happens is, in the Manson family to micromanagement, it's conjured up there like, you know, my truth and whatever. And even the lexicons we adopt start in California, jump over the border, infect the rest of America, jump on a boat, come across the Atlantic to Europe, pollute Europe. By the time we've adopted the California policies, they've changed it, and the whole cycle starts over again. And the corporatization of universities was an American thing with the micromanagement. I mean, America is one of the most bureaucratic states outside communist countries, so bureaucratic. And we have been bureaucratized because we were obsequious to America post-Suez crisis. And because we were bankrupt after the First Second World War, then post-Suez crisis, we became obsequious. So we thought, oh, Americans are doing it, we'll do it. And you lot were thinking, well, the Californians are doing it, we better do it. And this went on until this cancer spread. And we lost our universities. We're no longer studying the universe in any symphonic, rigorous, deep, thick manner. It became shallow metrics. The universe became the proliferation of uniformity, risk-averse. Discretion went out the window. Creativity went out the window. Learning for learning's sake, which actually inculcates people with the ability to create companies, to create new scientific theories, new symphonies, new projects, new literature, whatever. We've turned ourselves. ChatGPT is a historical thing, telling us what we are already.
Right.
That's my thing about it.
Yeah, I also think you know, when history looks back on this era, mid 20th century through our current time here in the 21st century, what they're going to say when they look at Catholic higher education, Catholic universities, and I don't know what it's like in the UK, but here in the United States, I think this is definitely true, that what we have witnessed in the light of what you've just described, Conor, is the greatest missed opportunity in the history of Catholic education. You know, we could have been the vanguard of saying something completely creative, imaginative, earth-shattering, revolutionary, and exposed everything else as the bullshit that it is. And instead, we bought the bullshit too. Hook, line, and sinker.
You were far too Protestant. You had the most golden cultural opportunity and you squandered it. If you'd held fast, they would have coalesced, they would have gravitated back to that mode of common sense. Instead, you sup with the devil in a Protestant cultural fashion and with this sort of waspish notions of metrics, and you were no longer really Roman Catholic with your own curriculum steeped, woven through with metaphysics and adventure and risk. Nothing riskier than creation, except for the incarnation. And universities should actually, manifest that.
No, absolutely.
There was that big law case that was finally against Harvard and North Carolina. Did you see that? Where about the what's it called? People getting into Harvard, certain what's it called?
Legacy.
It's going to be the legacy one now, but it wasn't legacy. It was to do with affirmative action for so Asian and white people advantage lost the law case, and now someone's taking it to court now for the legacy cases.
Yeah.
People in because of family rather than IQ, if you like, such things as IQ, and so forth. So it was a WASP metaphysic, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant metaphysic, in a Weberian sense, Calvinist in that sense. It really was one big manifestation of the prosperity gospel. It was Calvinism's predestination writ large in educational tertiary institutions. It was already nihilistic, and you guys had the opportunity to hold fast.
Yeah, we sure did. And even amidst some of the so-called Catholic universities that were better than the others in their Catholic identity. I mean, I taught at one at DeSales. Rodney still teaches there. I mean, it was known as, well, there's a pretty decent Catholic identity there. But what it was this, and this is so true of so many places that say, oh, that's still Catholic, was that the administration of the university simply atomized the Catholic identity of the school in this tiny thing called the theology department. Meanwhile, the entire rest of the university bought into that waspy Protestant BS notion of modern quantifiable metrics. And so every question has to answer a problem that is whose answers are convergent rather than divergent. And that then defines the entire university, except for this tiny little dot called the theology department. And Rodney, you want to talk to that a little bit more, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, Conor, that's exactly everything you just said is exactly right. I mean, I sent a letter, Larry, to the former president, who tried to maintain Catholic identity by having Orthodox theologians, and then he got me and Larry. But anyhow, so how that worked out?
More than he bargained for.
Yeah, exactly. But I remember writing a letter at one point saying, Father O'Connor, there's all this desire for people for like old school stuff, like good beer again, versus sort of Miller and Bud and good bourbon made like they used to make it in the 1700s, and slow food and like real food from the earth and all that stuff. Why don't we start a slow education movement? It's like the most Catholic thing in the world to do. And I was laughed out of town. I mean, he was like, "Oh, get in touch with the real world," is basically what I got there. And now what's happening to these little crappy Catholic schools, God bless DeSales, is that they're going out of business, because it's not only bad education, it's a stupid business model. And these little universities that don't have billion-dollar, trillion-dollar endowments can't keep up with the ones that do. Harvard can afford to be worthless because the endowment's so big.
Well, can I just two things? First of all, Harvard has now more administrators than they do students. So they're part of the council. And I don't think anyone there is particularly smart, certainly not in the humanities, but decidedly mediocre. But we had a joke about Jesus last time, didn't we, running on water? Let's try another one. So if Jesus rocked up today, he'd never make tenure, because he never started publishing until he was 30. He just sat there and learned and didn't study. He didn't produce anything. No miracles, no writings, and he never published. When he started speaking, he never put his thoughts into words. So he wouldn't even get tenure anymore at a Catholic university. The boy wasn't productive.
No, he wasn't. Hey, Adrian, you've gone strangely silent on us here. What do you have to say with regard to this conversation about modern Catholic education, or the university in general? Oh, Adrian froze again. Just when I asked my question. I don't know if he heard me. Is he coming back?
Yeah, but
uh-oh. Well, Adrian, I don't know, but your audio has gone crazy again. Oh, and he's gone. And here he comes. This is for those of you who are just listening to this, and with the YouTube video would show that Adrian has disappeared and is now okay. Are you back? No.
In spirit, but not.
Yeah, his spirit is here, but his flesh is not.
University.
Go ahead, Connor.
I think there's an important point to be made. So with the crisis coming, with this paradigm is shown to fail, unfortunately, we'll have to live through the car crashes.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry, friends. Yes. Am I back?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Your
So no,
bad.
I just wanted to. Yeah, I think Connor's sort of opening statement about the state of the university today was outstanding and sort of right in every detail. So I would just kind of underscore that, and then things that both you and Rodney have said. I was actually still kind of stuck in the earlier part of the discussion, so
that's good. I don't have that luxury as the host. I have to connect dots and move things along. But yeah, I've been a guest on certain podcasts where I've lost track of the conversation because I'm still thinking of something I said 20 minutes ago, and then I get called out. I feel like I'm a fool, but anyway, that's fine. That's fine.
There was this guy named Socrates one time who was found on the porch, when the symposium was going on, still thinking about a conversation he was having on the way. That's not a bad place.
But anyway, when we lost Adrian, well, I don't know if Adrian is still here or not. But anyway, Conor, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think first of all, when we realize the paradigm of the fear of everything, for example, and the one ring to rule them all, and this, we have to, when we're disabused of this, or this is disclosed as fantasy, as a chimera, as a complete, there's no reality to it. And that actually the sciences are not hard sciences versus soft sciences versus humanities, but we're all proto-arts. When Shakespeare writes King Lear, he's trying to write literature. When trying to give an account of the human condition, trying to, when someone composes Bach composes, he's pursuing something. And when a physicist is doing something, they're also proto-artists. They're trying to engage with reality of existence and give an account of it as best and with as much fidelity as possible. They're all arts. Yeah. They're all arts. That's all, to better and less degrees. And it's better that they faced up to that. There is no calibration. There is no objectivity. Does not look like that. That doesn't exist. It never has, and it certainly never will. So when the universities, wake up to that notion, and the notion that all disciplines, any discipline, cannot be put into silos. They are always, always, always mutually informing, dependent, and so forth. Just like Walker was saying in more abstract terms or more metaphysical terms between the receptacle and form and matter and so forth, every subject swaps places there. So think of a discipline, right? Is the discipline acting like form or is it acting like the matter? So, for example, physics, maths will be almost like the matter for physics. It has to be presumed for physics to operate. Yeah. So biology, it will have to, we'll be woven through with lots of disciplines. Aristotle's subalternation, yeah. So you have all these disciplines which seem to have the appearance of being autonomous or woven through with different forms of dependency. Yeah. Not only that, all disciplines are every science, for example, entails, funny enough, a scientist who goes to the toilet in the morning, who has to eat, has to sleep, has a circadian clock, has a metabolism, has desires, has hopes, has depression, has night and day, all this stuff. So any discipline is an art form, completely. Yeah. And all sciences, all arts, all scientia is woven through with dependence elsewhere. I mean, I don't know. Does physics think that mathematics is made of strings? I don't think so. So but they have to employ mathematics to understand strings. This is why Plato so cleverly, because we mentioned mathematics last time, it's so weirdly, when he sets up his curriculum, he has them doing maths for 10 years before they go off to the army. 10 years. And people say, well, why is Plato doing this? And people thought it must be because it makes you a good thinker and so forth. And they, no, Plato is pushing you through the phenomenal mathematics so you're prepared, not for being a better thinker, but actually prepared because you're bumping up against the motion of mathematics, of enacting a proof. You're preparing yourself for the principles of metaphysics later on. So it's training you not to be like you juggle balls and sort of just a technical thing. It's actually the mind becoming predisposed to even higher principles. So that's why it's a necessary stage for Plato, one of 10 years of education. But that's because all subjects, that's the universe doing the university. And it's organic. It's a body, it's a kidney, the liver, the heart, the eyeballs, the earlobes. It's all one body.
Yeah.
And limbs are doing different things. But as we said last time, if you cut off a limb, make it be, it ain't no more, it isn't an arm any longer. If physics tries to be standalone, it'd look like a clown. It won't look like a superhero.
Yeah.
It'll just look like a clown. And unfortunately, before it sobers up and comes back to some sapientia, comes to wise appropriation, and people actually get chutzpah, actually guts again. I mean, if love drives out fear, the Catholic universities have been so driven by fear, there's hardly any love of God left. Right. And the even notion that reading itself, reading a menu, is not a theological act. If they haven't grasped that, the writing of a book and the reading of a book are acts of liturgy, of metaphysical theology. If they haven't got that sense of wonderment, which is absolutely, there is nowhere outside that wonderment. This is why this epistemological notion that you get in the left bankers, the philosophers, the Lacanian real. Have you heard of Lacanian real? The real, the slime behind, the barrier, it'll spill over and Heimlich, the uncanny and so forth. That's simply an epistemological notion. It's rubbish. It's something you can't see beyond those categories. But I said before, the bumblebee probably can. There ain't no real. There is nothing outside of divine wonderment or economy. There is no even corporate or the mere. There is no mere. What you do to the least you do to me. And I think that's for all of creation. Right. Nothing is outside the divine economy. And that therefore, the Catholic university should be saying, if you're studying geology, mate, you're going to a form of church. So don't stick that in the theology department and judge people by the metrics of them just going to mass. I'm not saying they shouldn't go to mass. Well done, Adrian, this morning. But it's not that at all. But they think that's us being Catholic. Whilst the reason we go to mass is why they go and study geology.
Yeah.
Or we go and study, sociology. Or we go and study this.
Yeah.
That has to be a generative program. Has to be generative from the inside. As soon as the first axiom is creation and the second axiom is incarnation,
I'm glad you. We're running out of time. Rodney has to go soon, but I'm glad you brought all of this up, Adrian, because one of the things that was knocking around Conor, one of the things that was knocking around in my head was, I was thinking of, I just recently reread Balthasar's Theologic 1 and 2. And his juxtaposition, it's very Johannine, of grace and truth, of the cruciform Christ as the metric of truth. And this is rattling around in my head that, do our Catholic universities unify our thinking, unify the disciplines with that metric for truth in mind? And they most certainly do not. This raises the question to me before we have to, you can comment on that all you want. I'd also like to comment then with maybe the 10 minutes we have left with whether, where do we go? Have universities as a model run their course? Should we as believers be looking to different ways of institutionalizing learning and education? Then is this model moribund? Is it dead in the water? I just tossed that out there.
I prefer, growing up a Belfast Protestant, I'm sort of allergic to the Reformation. So I think it's better to reform from within. I think someone in an institution which is already there, I would honor my sisters and brothers back 1,000 years ago invented this stuff, who are already echoing the Academy of Plato. I want to honor that. I want to be handed over for what they did bravely and with vision. And so it's about resuscitating from within. And so it just takes a few brave souls out there to actually let enough love to drive out fear. The ghettoizing theology, get ashamed of the religion, ashamed of theology, the demeaning and denigration of it. It just needs a few brave souls to say, right, let's resuscitate this, and then it will grow, because this is going to be exposed. Unfortunately, a lot of people will die and marriages will break up and substance abuse and depressions and so forth. And what I'm saying, I think we're setting a bunch of students out there are not going to maintain a relationship, not going to maintain a job, not going to attain any sense of loyalty, of long-term thinking, of the long game. And we are on a sugar diet, a sugar rush diet of endless novelty, which amounts to just candy floss brains, TikTok brains. And how can you maintain relationships with that, whether it be with marriages or jobs or vocations or anything, if we have a TikTok brain, the fast sugar brain, and then because we know we're on sand, we give false gods of false calibration with false metrics. Here's our outputs. And back to the Jesus joke, if you don't publish, you perish in academia. Christ doesn't get tenure. I mean, it's rubbish. Rather than let people produce writing of real worth, which has legs, we McDonald'size it, publish it with false vanities, with false thirst for novelties, rather than any wise gestation that produces work that actually can engage with God's creation.
Well, then we end sort of where we began, which is the question of crisis as something good. If we're going to reform from within, then maybe this entire thing, as you've described, this TikTok mind, because it can't sustain relationships, it can't sustain the truth. Maybe it's on the verge of some kind of either some sort of collapse or catharsis, or crisis-oriented change. I don't know. Adrian, do you want to say something to all of that, and then up to Rodney, and then maybe we should wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, the current iteration of the university system could collapse overnight, but that doesn't necessarily mean the end of the ideal or of the tradition that sustains it. So I think Conor's point is well taken. Yeah, I mean, the point about interconnection, which that Conor was making a few minutes ago, is really important. And it is really important to also to see, as he was saying, the kind of analogy between the interconnection that bodies themselves are, and the interconnectedness of disciplines that study bodies among themselves and with all other disciplines. And I think that the interconnection that bodies are, I mean, including inanimate bodies, I mean, has to be sort of, in order to understand it, one really does need to think in these classical terms, act and potency, or the receptacle, and so forth. Because this is just the thought that I was kind of playing with a few minutes ago when you asked, how come you're so silent? It's what, are you sick or something? Because the thing is, matter is not by itself an underlying thing, but it's sort of that, among other sort of functions, it's that by which the bodies that we experience in this world underlie, but their underlying is an ongoing receiving and an ongoing being actualized. And within that ongoing being receiving and being actualized, there are parts, dimensions, and so forth that are being mobilized and also being actualized, because they're precisely dimensions and parts of this ongoing receiving, right? And it's all very dynamic, not only in terms of the relationship of these parts and dimensions and so forth to the whole, but also amongst themselves, right? There's an interconnection. And it seems to me that part of that one of the kind of sins of the myth of the base is a sin against interconnectedness, right? Because it's about artificially separating something that in some sense is really there, but not in that way, right? And and in a way, even artificial separation itself is not necessarily wrong, but it needs to be accompanied by an understanding of an artificial nature, so that it can become a kind of conscious proto-artistic activity of the sort that Conor was talking about. So this is all just a long-winded way of saying that I think Conor is really onto something, that how we think about bodies, whether we see them as sort of dynamic interconnectednesses, it hangs together with how we think of the sciences that study bodies, not only in themselves and not only in their, but also in their relation to one another and in their relation to all other disciplines. And the issue is going to be, do we affirm an interconnectedness in which, you know, each element is sort of fully itself, fully present, because it's interconnected, and because there's a constant sort of exchange, a constant switching, like
a mutual
Conor,
realization, not just interconnected, mutual realization.
It's a mutual realization, right? I mean, look, all of these words are inadequate, right? And you can always sort of criticize them in a second moment, because you can misunderstand them. But of course, it's not. I mean, it's a dynamically unfolding coherence, if you want to put it like that, right?
That's a great way to put it.
You know, each one itself, to the extent that it's exchanging and communion with the others, vice versa, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? We could spend a lot of time unfolding that, but I just think that I just want to affirm the vision of, you know, how we think about what it is that we're looking for in you know, sciences concerning bodies, just is, you know, what we think we're going to be looking for in an educational institution, and vice versa, right? I think that's a really important insight.
Yeah.
Can I just one quick point? The way we say things, you can always qualify. Adrian's right there, although I do think your last description was great. Really loved it. But it is. Sometimes the way we say things differently does help us change the way we think. For example, I remember the first day I read Aquinas saying, well, because we're all brought up in our Cartesian way of thinking, right? Culturally.
Right.
When he says, actually, no, the soul's not in the body is in the soul. That's a game changer for our imaginations. So we have to think of the university in the universe in a way, and also, you know, so rather than being the university being reduced to physics, it's all about around. We have to think of again the body. The organ is in the body. The body is in the soul. Because it's the verb of metaphysics that keeps it from hemorrhaging.
Totally. Yeah, and it's going to be both things, right? It's going to be that there's a kind of a priori unity of the whole, and of communion as a kind of form of being. And at the same time, it is, I mean, this is back to your point about a reduction and emergence, right? At the same time, the communion is going to be sort of established a posteriori by something that is going to look like, you know, not only an interplay, but even to some extent an interaction, right? It's going to be both things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would, I'm sitting here thinking, and I know Rodney's got to go, so we got to wrap this up, but In the 1990s, there was a great book written by James Burchell called The Dying of the Light. I did a review for it in the Thomist. David L. Schindler gave a talk on it at a conference that I ran. That's where I first met Rodney and you, Adrian, in Allentown. And anyway, the book, it's brilliant in the sense that what it was a historical dissection of precisely how I think it was like 30 different religiously affiliated universities in the United States, mostly Protestant, but quite a few Catholics, went about the process of dismantling the very vision of what a university should be that you two have been describing. He detailed all of the incremental historical steps of what I think Conor would call the Californiization of modern higher education, to the point then where they then all begin to look alike. Every single one of them loses their religious identity, and the very definition of what it means to be a Christian then comes to be, instead of the university being as Conor would say, in the Christian faith comes now to be viewed as this tiny little speck inside this modern thing called the university. Yeah, exactly. I don't know if the book is still in print, but it's a great book.
Yeah, I have to read it.
Okay.
You know,
Rodney,
sorry. Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, and there just is kind of Catholic, intellectual inferiority complex, so, I mean, I've noticed that in several different areas, I mean, it's really a recurrent pattern that this sort of, mainstream, I mean, that Catholic sort of academics will be very, 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 very eager to show that they support what turns out to have been the mainstream consensus about 10 years ago. Right. And it's always in the background. It's like, we're never gonna, we're never really gonna live down the Galileo affair. So we have to kind of show that,
they're saying
we're never really gonna live down Pius IX.
It's like
these Catholics go. Sorry, these Catholics go. No, listen, we're really behind support of the idea of setting up the Large Hadron Collider. We want to have it to
precisely.
Happen.
Exactly.
Oh, it's happened and it's been told.
Right, exactly. That's always the way it is, and it's like there are certain debates. There are a lot of debates like this, right? Where and one of the symptoms is that the Catholics will engage with a very, very, very sort of sanitized version of whatever it is, whether it's science or a current version of sexual politics or whatever it is. Whereas, as you say, right, the people that are sort of farthest ahead in any of these debates are already seeing that the game has changed, the ground has shifted.
Oh yeah.
And so I do totally agree with the point about the Gestalt shift. I mean,
well, I agree. I want to dwell. Adrian,
the only reason that I have to,
No, I want to dwell on the idea that
go ahead.
The Catholics are like 10 years, 20 years behind that. When I was in Rome in June, the Vatican had organized this thing called the Universal Meeting of Fraternity or something or other, and it was all based on Fratelli Tutti. And I mean, the Via della Conciliazione, they had decked it all out, expecting these huge crowds and all these singers and so on. I think 50 people showed up the entire day. It was a huge flop. And the reason is, as my friend Mark Stallman points out, he says the problem is the Catholic Church is just now discovering globalism when the rest of the world has realized globalism is dead.
Sick of it.
Sick of it, and that it's dead.
Or at least it's sick of it, right? Yeah.
Back to your point, or was it your point, Rodney? I actually think what's really strange in the crises that we're in, the variety of crises, the Catholic Church and Catholic education are in. This is what's brilliant. I mean, brilliant in an ironic sense. It's in the position to bring back to reveal again the common sense, to reveal back people with souls. I mean, these Catholics are trying to be trendy. I mean, education as it is, I don't know how we're going to spot AI programs because we're already doing them. It's ridiculous.
Totally.
Who's going to really spot Dante and Shakespeare, or proper physics, or proper maths, or proper, because we're already so automatons. I just think, but I do think that the Catholic Church and Catholic education, if it would just have a sense of belief in itself and be forthright, be a child, be childish grown-ups,
would take off.
It would kick off.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, this just goes back to something I mean, I mean, since meeting Conor and kind of being in dialogue with him over the years, I mean, I've realized that, I mean, one of the many things that he's helped me see more clearly, I mean, and this is, of course, is something that, having hung out a lot with Big Dave Schindler was sort of there, but I mean, it's just Conor helped bring it into focus for me, is that it's really a question of like, no, the burden of proof is not where people think it is, and that sounds like a kind of that sounds facile. It's simple, but it's not facile, because it is connected. It's connected precisely with a whole series of sort of interconnected gestalt shifts, right? Where you suddenly realize that the things that seem most marginal, because they've sociologically become the most marginal, are actually the things without which you can't make sense of anything else, right?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
Go,
Rodney.
So it's just like, I remember you always saying, the atheists can't give an account of why they have breakfast in the morning and why they don't eat their children,
Even better, as I said to the group once, if atheism is true, there are no atheists.
Exactly.
That's a simple, logical, consistent conclusion.
Exactly.
If atheism is true, there are no atheists. But the thing is, we're not going to spend our lives working really hard to arrive at the faith of the washerwoman.
Precisely.
Because the washerwoman, maybe that's an Irish phrase, you don't know it. You know the faith of the washerwoman, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
America, yeah. So, because she's right. She's right.
Right.
And that's what we'll get to.
Mm-hmm.
But she would be fearless in that. Washerwoman would be fearless and wouldn't have the insecurity of trying to be posh and educated. I mean, one should be so educated that one becomes a child again. Right. Not the childishness of the so-called grown-ups who try to be collaborative with the moment of the world. Because the moment of the world, at the time you hold on to it, is already old-fashioned. It's already crap. It's already been exposed.
That's right. So all right, then why don't we end there? We really have to end here. I have to go. Rodney has to go. So we'll end with, unless you become like this child, unless you become like a child,
like this
Faith of the Washerwoman. Yeah, Faith of Washerwoman. So I know, Rodney's got to go. I got to go. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I could talk for hours to you guys, hours and hours. Conor, Adrian, especially, thank you so very much. Maybe we'd have to have a part 3 down the road. I'm certainly open to an ongoing series of conversations. So anyway, thanks a lot, guys. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks, fellas. Yeah.
Bye.
God bless. Bye.